Hello and welcome. I am Ejaz Haider and you're watching Indus Special. Our top story today is about Kartarpur Sahib corridor. Pakistan had proposed the opening of the corridor when Navjot Singh Sidhu, an Indian cricketer turned politician, had come to Pakistan for the swearing-in ceremony of Prime Minister Imran Khan. Sidhu was heavily criticized by the BJP government and also some Indian Punjab politicians. Now the Indian government has approved the development of Kartarpur corridor. The decision was taken in a meeting chaired by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and also Rajnath Singh. The Pakistani foreign minister tweeted, Pakistan has already conveyed to India its decision to open Kartarpur corridor for Baba Guru Nanak's 550th birth anniversary. Prime Minister Imran Khan will do the groundbreaking at Kartarpur facilities on 28th November. We welcome the Sikh community to Pakistan for this auspicious occasion. This was Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi. So how did this come about? Did it happen because New Delhi did not want to be seen as denying its own Indian Sikh community a long-standing demand? Did it fear that Pakistan's offer, if not responded to positively, will upstage it? Is there a lesson in this reciprocity for the overall tenor of relations? We discussed this starting with the Federal Minister for Information, Fawad Chaudhry. Minister Chaudhry, you are also stated to have said that this is a very good development. Just walk us through this because, as I mentioned, the idea was mooted by Pakistan to Mr. Sidhu, and Sidhu was heavily criticized. So what changed between then and now?
Well, I think nothing changed on our part, but...
I mean the Indian government.
Yeah, Indian government has changed, obviously, their policy. Because primarily, we believe it's an humanitarian issue. When the pilgrimage of thousands and thousands of pilgrims want to come and do the rituals here, we don't see it as a political tool, you know. We take it as a humanitarian issue and we wanted to facilitate all those pilgrimages. And once Mr. Navjot Singh Sidhu was here, so Army Chief he was very clear about his idea. And I think when he got back, then there was issues between Indian government and their Punjab government. And I think Prime Minister Modi's government has been severely criticized by the groups within India for not letting this happen. And primarily, I think it's the internal pressure that has now forced Indian government to change their position. But whatever the situation now is, nonetheless, we welcome this development. And I think this will strengthen the peace groups on both sides. You know, Pakistan and India has a relationship which has obviously gone better many times. And primarily there are groups within India and Pakistan who obviously oppose to any normalcy between the two countries. But there are other groups. And, as a policy, we want to encourage people and groups who are basically pro-peace.
Minister Chaudhry, this is very interesting that you mention normalcy, the requirement for normalcy and normalization of relations, and you also mention that there are groups in India and also in Pakistan that are opposed to normalization of relations. So are you saying that this is the official policy of the PTI government to reach out to India and try to normalize relations on the basis of the framework for normalization that was agreed upon first in 2004 and then also in 2012?
Yes. If you recall, the Prime Minister Imran Khan in his first speech emphasized and mentioned that relationship with India must be normalized. And he said that if India takes one step, we will take two steps. So this gives you a theme about Prime Minister's vision about Pak-India relationship. Also, if you recall, when he was in Saudi Arabia, he mentioned that Pakistan is in a unique geographic position because geography places Pakistan between India and China, the two biggest markets of the world. So if we have, if we could if the relationship between India and Pakistan and Afghanistan are normalized, and then the kind of relationship we have with China, this places Pakistan into a very unique economic opportunity zone, where we have the huge market of India and China on one side, and a stable Afghanistan and and a trade route to Central Asian states. Then Pakistan becomes hub of this whole economic activity of this region, and this is the bigger picture we are looking at, and that's why we are very keen to have our relationship improved with India, and instead of getting into the usual course of detractions and the kind of the hot exchanges, we want to normalize relationship. And now we are looking for. We thought that we will be responded positively, but I hope that as elections, this is an election year in India. So after the elections, we are looking forward for more positive developments.
This is very significant what you're saying, because you are essentially talking about Pakistan being the hub of trade. Now, as you know, India and Afghanistan have for a very long time been demanding that Pakistan give them a corridor where Indian goods, the Afghan exports to India can go through Pakistan, and the Indian exports to Afghanistan can come through Pakistan. Are you saying that there is now a rethink on this? Because previously we have denied India an overland route to Afghanistan.
Well, this is something we should look at. We should move towards these things, opening of trade, opening of borders. But primarily, right now, the problem is that we are what we are witnessing in Kashmir is also a major issue. In Kashmir, the internal, the desire for freedom has gone to the level that has never been witnessed before. Pakistan, as you know, cannot stay aloof from the developments in Kashmir. So India must realize that they need to gauge their own interests. Do they think that their policy about or that the Kashmir should control their policies, even the bigger economic policies, or they want to come up in terms on Kashmir? I think the first step that needs to be taken are the negotiations. So unless India and Pakistan negotiate things, as I said earlier to my interview with Indian media, that we have a history of hostility. We have fought wars. We have three now. Now we have three options. Either we can have another war. Both countries are nuclear-equipped countries. So those who will remain will talk. The second is that Ajit Doval's doctrine is weakening each other. That is continuing. And the third is, let's come on the table and put your issues to each other. So we want to opt for number 3 option. But if obviously you need two hands to clap, India has to agree on the third option. Otherwise, it will continue as it is.
Okay, so you mentioned the fact that Pakistan is strategically located and we should exploit our strategic location, obviously in and through the trade corridor. But you've also mentioned occupied Kashmir, which is, of course, a very significant dispute between India and Pakistan, but also primarily in relation to the right to self-determination of the Kashmiris. Are we saying that we are going to link these two issues, or are we saying that Kashmir dispute can be separately talked about and negotiated while we go ahead with the trade corridors towards India also and towards Afghanistan also?
You see, it won't be possible. The problem is that the price the Pakistan has paid for Kashmir is too much. We have already fought 3 wars on it. Thousands and thousands of people have laid their lives for the freedom of Kashmir. So now suggesting that we should, take our eyes off Kashmir and let's talk of trade is not possible.
Okay.
So I think it's the best way will be that we sit on the table and talk everything under the sun that is possible. Kashmir is one of the integral issue between India and Pakistan, and unless we don't come up with on some solution on Kashmir, it will be difficult for us to move forward. So primarily, we want issues to be discussed. Trade is an issue, terrorism is an issue, and Kashmir is an issue. Terrorism in Pakistan is obviously a bigger issue for us.
So we are still talking about the overall situation, the various baskets, or later as they are called, the pillars in a composite dialogue. But one final question, this is interesting because this particular act of reciprocity, our offer to open the Kartarpur Sahib corridor and then of course the Indians finally coming round to it, there has not been an official agreement on this, and yet this thing has happened. This I find very interesting and fascinating. Do you agree with my sentiment?
Well, yes, indeed, this is a step towards right direction, and we like to have more steps like that. We want to, in fact, I wanted primarily, I also wanted to ease our visa restrictions for Indian journalists. I thought that if we want to open up, the most important thing is that we have to ease the journey of journalists to each other countries. I want Indian journalists to come to Pakistan and see the sentiments of the people of Pakistan and see what is the feeling about India here. I mean, it's not.
And you want to do it unilaterally?
Pardon? Say it again.
I said, do you want to do it unilaterally? Because normally it's always both the sides reciprocate issues. But you saying that you would like to see the Indian journalists come here and the visa restrictions lifted for their work in Pakistan. If India does not agree to do the same for the Pakistani journalists, will you still go ahead and unilaterally ease the visa restrictions for the Indian journalists?
Yeah, I think there's no cable with this proposition even. I think Pakistan should ease out. I have spoken to the Foreign Office and the Interior Ministry, and my personal recommendation is that we should ease out visa restrictions for Indian journalists unilaterally. There's no, even if India don't, relax visas for our journalists, there's no problem with that. I hope that this will go a long way towards that. I'm talking about with the Foreign Office and Interior Ministry about that, and personally, I think I should be able to convince them that even a unilateral action will be in the best interest of the region.
Okay, thank you so much. Federal Minister for Information, Fawad Chaudhry, was speaking with us on the issue of Kartarpur Sahib corridor. We will also get some expert opinion from India on this after this short break. Welcome back to Indus Special. We continue with our story with reference to Kartarpur Sahib corridor. We were also talking to Federal Information Minister Fawad Chaudhry, who said this is a very welcome move. And he also said significantly that Pakistan should exploit its strategic location, and said that he was in favor of unilaterally easing the visa regime for Indian journalists. And that's a very significant thought that he put on the table. We now have Jyoti Malhotra, Editor, National and Strategic Affairs at The Print. Jyoti, thank you for joining the program. I find this really interesting that this particular development has happened without any formal agreement. And I say this because we have seen that even when we put things on paper, those agreements are generally not particularly honored between India and Pakistan. How and why do you think this has come about?
Ejaz, I absolutely agree with you that India and Pakistan don't abide by most normal rules and regulations that other countries are governed by. For example, the 2012 December agreement on opening up the border for children below 14 and for older citizens above 60 has not been implemented. The tourism agreement has not been also ignored. So this particular initiative, and I would give full credit to the Imran Khan government for pursuing this, for proposing this initiative in the first place, I would give full, and naturally the Imran Khan government would not be able to do this without your military establishment on board, which is a very powerful one. But I would give full kudos to the military, to the Imran Khan government, to the civilian government, for not only proposing this initiative, but for, I think, galvanizing the sentiment in India, and for reminding Indians that, that politics, we can be beset with problems between our countries. We have terrorism, there is the Kashmir dispute, but there are also very, very important people-to-people issues. And I think that it is possible to separate matters like pilgrimage, travel, meeting, people from each other's countries, from the politics of terrorism, from the politics of Kashmir, water, etc., etc. So I think this particular initiative where Sikh pilgrims from India can walk across the international boundary between India and Pakistan and go to the Kartarpur Sahib Gurdwara, which, as you know, is a very, very holy Sikh shrine, is an enormous gesture on the part of Pakistan, and I think India has reciprocated this. And I truly hope that this will be the wedge that will open up other peace-building measures between our two countries. In fact, I'm really hoping that the Pakistan government can allow journalists like me to walk across this border and attend the groundbreaking ceremony that Prime Minister Imran Khan is going to do on the 28th. So I think big move on the part of Pakistan and hugely appreciated here in India.
As I said, the Information Minister Fawad Chaudhry, just before I got you on the program, was talking to me, and he said that he is talking to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he's suggesting that even if India does not reciprocate the gesture, he is in favor of easing the visa regime for Indian journalists, because he wants the Indian journalists to come, stay here, report, the Pakistani affairs, and I think he was very serious about that. But here's the question, Jyoti, and that is that when we say, and we hear this very often from India, that, okay, there is the Kashmir dispute, there are issues with water, and there are a number of other issues, as you know, in the 2004 composite dialogue, and also later the one that now has, instead of the baskets, the pillars. All these issues are there. But Pakistan gets the sense that India wants to move away from the Kashmir dispute, and therefore India always insists on other issues, which obviously must be debated, but that cannot be as a substitute to substantive discussions on other disputes.
Well, Ejaz, I would like to say the following, that India and Pakistan have had civilian governments, some more powerful than the other. There was Nawaz Sharif, then Kargil happened, the Agra talks. Anyway, we can talk about this again and again over the last 20, 30, 40 years, the state of play between our two countries. I feel today that there is no option for India and Pakistan to talk across all issues, whether it's terrorism, or whether it's Kashmir, or whether it's water, the Guler barrage, open crossings between our two countries. We have issues. We have very serious issues on the Mumbai attacks. It's going to be 10 years in a few days of the Mumbai attacks anniversary. But there is absolutely no movement on the Pakistan side on bringing any of those masterminds to book. Now, the Indian government, and sometimes I know that Pakistan has a lot of problem with terrorism on its own, on their own soil. Today, in Karachi, for example, the Chinese consulate was attacked by terrorists, and your authorities have remarkably killed all these guys. So I would say that just as you understand the problem of terrorism on your own territory, you must understand what happened in Mumbai 10 years ago. I think that would be a huge step. And I think apart from the government, the people of India must also get sense that the people of Pakistan, whether it's the government, the military establishment, whoever it is, whoever's in power and wields power, I think if you give us some gesture on the Mumbai attacks, I'm almost sure, Ejaz, of course I'm a journalist like you, and I don't speak for the government or for anybody else, but just for myself. But I sense that any gesture on the Mumbai attacks, on bringing the mastermind, whether it's Hafiz Saeed or Zakir Rehman, Naqvi, etc., all these men who were involved in those attacks. Bring them to book, some gesture on that, and I think the Indian government, whether it's the Modi government or afterwards, we have elections next year, we will go and walk the extra mile. I think that's a big, big deal. But yes, of course, we must talk about Kashmir, we must talk about terror, we must talk about water. We should talk about anything under the sun. We're neighbors. If we don't talk to each other, who are we going to talk to? So I think enough of this, these problems, and let's just get down to talk.
Okay. Now, without prejudice to the sentiments you have expressed over Mumbai, and these are generally the sentiments of all Indians, there is also a sense, because there are lots of technical legal issues here, and we have our own list of what we have wanted to do and which the Indian government has denied us in relation to investigations into the Mumbai thing. And also then Pakistan talks about the Samjhota terrorist attack, which involved a Hindu terrorist group. So these issues are obviously issues that need to be discussed. But I'm happy that you said that your own approach is that we must talk about all the issues. But I wanted to specifically go back to this Kartarpur Sahib corridor. It was something that should have been done much earlier. I'm happy that it's been done now. And yet, it took both sides so long to actually do it.
I think, Ejaz, you're absolutely right. Sometimes I feel, Ejaz, that the people of India and Pakistan are cursed, that our destiny is cursed, that our fate is cursed. I mean, look at the Kartarpur Sahib corridor issue. You have the Golden Temple in Amritsar, which is the holiest of the holy Sikh shrines. And less than 30 kilometers away, forget about the crow line, there's a road from Amritsar across the border to Lahore, which is less than 30 kilometers. And look at what our governments have done. We're building walls, we're building borders, we're demanding from our people all kinds of ridiculous visas and permits. I don't understand. We had a partition in 1947. It's 71 years. I think grown men and women have more sense than blocking off access and easy passage. And I think the people of India and Pakistan are really fed up with our government. Whether we say the military establishment in Pakistan or the right-wing governments that we have elected in India, whatever it is, I think they must understand that the people of India and Pakistan need to, have higher motivations. We need to go to our places of pilgrimage, whether it's Ajmer Sharif, whether it's Nankana Sahib. I mean, why is it?
No, I agree with you.
We owe it to our governments, make it a big favor for us that by giving visas, to go to the other side. I'm sorry, I think that's unacceptable.
No, I absolutely agree with you, Jyoti. I agree with you. There are a number of issues. For instance, let's take the disadvantaged women on both sides. I mean, there's so much that that can be done in terms of lateral coordination on both sides at the societal level also, at the state level also. And this place in Narwal district is barely 2 kilometers from the border. That said, thank you so much for joining me. Now we have with us our former High Commissioner to India, Ambassador Aziz Khan, and since we are looking at the Kartarpur Sahib corridor, an offer that was made by Pakistan and finally reciprocated by the Delhi government, I would like to ask Ambassador Khan, you had a long tenure in India, and in fact it was at the time when things were normalizing, and then 2008 happened and much else has happened, and the relations are in cold storage now. But then suddenly, without any formal agreement, we see that Pakistan offers something and India finally reciprocates. How does this work?
We had an increase in the number of pilgrims coming, particularly the Sikh yatris, also the Hindu yatris, as well as the Muslims going to the religious shrines in India. But and I think this particular move is in line with that spirit that Pakistan has always maintained. And I think it's a good idea that Pakistan made that offer. India initially was reluctant, but it's a good thing that they have also finally agreed to, because this is an important occasion, and this particular corridor would be greatly appreciated by the Sikh yatris and will create goodwill between the two countries at the people-to-people level.
Ambassador Khan, do you think that this can be a positive development also, given the overall tenor of relations, which I said relations have really nosedived? But could this be the first step back to an agreed framework where one can talk about the various baskets, the issues and the disputes?
It should, but the way things are between the two countries, the way India is treating the subject of talks with Pakistan and normalization of relations with Pakistan, I'm not very optimistic about it. The Indians have taken a very tough line, an extremely unreasonable line as far as the dialogue process is concerned. And now that the Indian national elections are due in about 6 months or so, and India and the BJP having taken that muscular policy line vis-a-vis Pakistan, I doubt very much if this would lead to any positive development between the two countries as far as talks, bilateral engagement is concerned. In fact, BJP's graph is going down at the moment, and perhaps they will try to enact the even tougher policy vis-a-vis Pakistan. As you can see also about the recent measures that they have done, changing names of Muslim names of cities into Hindu names, and so on and so forth. Yeah. This particular step, I think India has been, BJP has been forced to take, because it would have gone down poorly if India had said no to Pakistan's offer of this corridor. They are trying. This is an attempt. I personally feel you may think I'm being a bit too cynical, but it is an attempt to salvage that falling graph of popularity. It's because this would have been India saying no, BJP saying no to this offer of Pakistan would have gone down very poorly with the Sikh community particularly.
Ambassador Khan, do you think, you said that you are not particularly positive that this gesture or this development could lead to improving the overall tenor of relations in terms of bilateral dialogue. And this is election year, of course, as you mentioned. Assuming that the BJP returns to power, either with a full majority or in terms of a coalition, do you think in the next 5 years they would like to change tack, or would they want to continue with this tough policy that they have adopted in the last 4.5 years?
That would be a little, projecting too far in the future. But as things stand today, things are difficult. Let us see. I personally feel, for example, that BJP is not likely to come back with as large a majority as they had previously. And that was an opportunity where they could have taken some very positive and decisive steps. Because a weaker government then has to look over their shoulders, and the opposition, just if for nothing else, for political reasons, creates difficulties for any positive movement towards Pakistan. But I think the likelihood of things moving in a desirable manner between the two countries, in a sort of constructive manner, I am not very hopeful of that, personally speaking. I think that even if, because of international opinion or something, BJP does take a few measures, they would be more cosmetic than substantive, which can actually lead towards resolution of issues.
Last question. When you were the High Commissioner, and as I said, this was a time when lots of initiatives were being taken, and because of the 2004 normalization framework, dialogue framework also, Did this Kartarpur Sahib corridor issue at some point cropped up then, or this was a non-issue at that time?
No, I think this is I don't recall that this Kartarpur thing was ever discussed, for the simple reason that in any case there was an agreed framework of Sikh Yatris visiting their Panja Sahab and Baba Nanak and so on. So that was working smoothly, and large jathas used to come through Vaga by train. And things were working quite smoothly. I don't recall that the Kartarpur corridor was ever discussed.
Right. Thank you so much. Ambassador Aziz Khan was talking to us. Continuing with our coverage of Kartarpur Sahib corridor, we now have Smita Sharma, who's Deputy Editor, The Tribune. Smita, thank you for joining me on the program. I have also asked the same question to my guests earlier, which is that I find it really fascinating that while India and Pakistan usually do not even honor agreed frameworks and treaties, this is something which does not have any official imprimatur on a paper, and yet after Pakistan's offer, the Indian government finally decided to reciprocate it. Do you share my feelings on this?
Well, there are, of course, questions that have not been answered following yesterday's announcements on both sides. I mean, while the Indian cabinet, the sources suggesting to us that the Indian cabinet was deliberating on this issue for the past couple of weeks, and after which, in fact, they announced that they would be building up on the corridor on the Indian side, which is hardly a distance. The entire corridor itself is 4 kilometers. On the Indian side hardly being a few meters or a few kilometers at best. And from the Indian side to the international border, we also saw Shah Mahmood Qureshi make that announcement of Prime Minister Imran Khan going ahead with the groundbreaking ceremony on 28th of this month. But my whole point is, and this is what I was trying to ask both sides, I spoke to Indian and Pakistani officials yesterday. I said, look, both of you can develop the corridors on your respective sides. Nobody's going to stop you. But the whole point is, at the end of the day, when there's a merging point, what about the modalities so that the immigration checkpoint can be brought up there? What about the modalities of consular access to the pilgrims who are traveling from the Indian side to Pakistan? Is that something for which there is a consensus as well, to which I definitely got no sure answers? And of course, the suggestion that to work out all these modalities, eventually there would have to be some sort of a meeting, which is a catch-22 situation, given the fact that the two countries haven't really been sitting down on the dialogue table or going in for any sort of a meeting. So at some point in time, the officials from both sides will have to sit down and work on the logistical, the procedural aspects, so that this corridor can be functional. If at all, it might be well-meaning, but if the intention has to go through, there has to be something more concrete on paper.
I absolutely agree with you, and I think as far as the finer details are concerned, those details will have to be worked out formally at some point in time, and I think it will be sooner than later, given the anniversary that's coming up. But this is something which should have been done earlier. Pakistan, of course, when Navjot Singh Sidhu came for Prime Minister Imran Khan's swearing-in ceremony, that was a time when he got this message both from the Prime Minister and also from the Army Chief. But when he went back, he was criticized heavily by the Punjab politicians also and by the BJP government also. Now this has happened. Do you get a sense that this is because Delhi finally realized that they would come across as cussed and, in terms of denying a long-standing demand of the Sikh community? Could that be one of the reasons they have finally reciprocated the Pakistani gesture?
Look, I think there's definitely been a rethinking on the process. But if you look at Delhi's argument, India has been saying that this is a demand that has been raised by successive state governments, be it in Punjab or by the governments in center in India for the past 2 decades, including, a time when even, in fact, you had Pervez Musharraf as the president of Pakistan. The matter was raised then also, but somehow it once again entered into the cold bag. The point being that, look, this is an issue involving Sikh pilgrims, Sikh community sentiments that also resonates domestically on both sides. So other than being a foreign policy issue, more importantly, I think there is a domestic political constituency that both the governments are worried about, that both the governments want to reach out to and address, be it in Islamabad or in New Delhi. And also given the fact that, you are now commemorating the 550th anniversary of Guru Nanak Dev. Yesterday, if you go through the plans of the Indian cabinet resolution, in the overarching context, one of the decisions was, of course, the building of the corridor on the Indian side. But there are other, in fact, decisions also that have been announced. So clearly for the Indian government or be it the Pakistani government, there is that clear political implication or the nuances to the decision, which has, of course, made both these sides think about what can be done in a scenario where the two sides officially are still not talking, still not meeting.
Correct. That's very interesting. But since you talk about the fact that both sides are not talking, do you think this could possibly lead to a dialogue, or you think it's not going to improve the atmospherics as far as the overall bilateral relationship is concerned?
Ejaz, unfortunately, me, who is also called one of the Jholawalas in India, the candlelight crew people, there's also that cynic in me, having watched the India-Pakistan story for the last 15 years and more closely as a journalist. So I really wouldn't jump the gun here, because in India it is very clear, and I had reported on the story that the foreign secretary here, who had briefed the parliamentary panel, and the parliamentary panel's assessment was by and large the Indian government would find itself in a tight spot to go forward on any issue of a dialogue with Pakistan, with elections remaining just a few months away. On Kartarpur corridor, maybe if some junior level officials do get in touch, perhaps that could be a way out of trying to reach on the functionality. But in terms of this, opening up the route for talks of bilateral formalities, that's not something that I see. There will be these sparks, like we have seen in the India-Pak story for many years now. There are ups and downs. Even as we talk about the Kartarpur Bonhomie, remember today India has summoned Pakistani diplomats and launched a strong protest on what it sees as the Khalistani row, the shadow over the Sikh pilgrims who are currently in Pakistan, the over 3,800 plus Sikh pilgrims from India. So that kind of bitterness, that Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gham, there's a movie in Bollywood, I think that very well defines this dysfunctional relationship that the two countries have been going through. And I really wouldn't be too optimistic of any dialogue process getting initiated because of the Kartarpur decision anytime soon. If anything, in any ways, there's always many a slip between the cup and the lip when it comes to the diplomats or the politicians in both these countries.
You have just said what Ambassador Aziz Khan said to me a while ago, and he also said that he's not particularly confident that this bonhomie could translate into something bigger as far as the bilateral dialogue is concerned. But let me ask you something, and of course, I mean, prediction is very difficult, but this is election year. Now, assuming that the BJP government is returned to power with whatever majority, whether they put together a coalition government or they have a larger majority, do you think they would? Because we've seen that the idea is to get tough on Pakistan and to not engage Pakistan positively. If they were to return to power, do you think that's going to change, or it would be the same, or Delhi might decide to get even tougher with Pakistan?
Look, first of all, of course, I wish I could crystal gaze the election outcome. So as of today, the Indian election scenario is looking very, very fluid. And the litmus test is being seen as the election outcomes that we are waiting for the crucial 5 assembly elections that are being held now. So that will also give us a sense of which way things are perhaps going to flow. They have been called the semi-finals of the big 2019 elections for India. And between now to May 2019, there are a lot of possibilities that are being spoken about. Either the BJP returning with more numbers, the BJP returning with reduced numbers and entering a coalition, to even the possibility of a third front government. Now, these political election analysis aside, the fact does remain that in India and Pakistan, aside from the 2013 elections in Pakistan, where I was covering it on the ground, where India wasn't really a major issue, it was fought mostly on domestic issues. This elections, in the current one, we did see India come back as an issue in Pakistan for political parties. Similarly, in India, Pakistan is a strong domestic campaign rhetoric issue. So once the campaign gets over, once the election results are in, a new government always has a breather, a window of at least a couple of months to try and sort out and look for new formulations. Because at some stage, they would want to be seen as trying to engage with a neighbor that you cannot wish away.
Okay, thank you so much. Smita Sharma was talking to us with reference to the Kartarpur Sahib corridor and whether this particular development could also positively impact the overall relations between India and Pakistan, and she isn't particularly confident. Neither was Ambassador Aziz Khan. We're going to take a short break, and at the other end of the break, we will discuss our second story of the day, which is the US sanctions on Iran and a report by the International Atomic Energy Agency that Iran is in compliance with the JCPOA, which is a multilateral agreement. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. We move on to our second story, which relates to a report by the International Atomic Energy Agency that Iran is in compliance with the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, despite a decision in May by the Trump administration to unilaterally withdraw from a multilateral deal and slap back Iran-specific sanctions. We have Ambassador Zamir Akram with us. Ambassador Akram, thank you for being on the program. The American decision to get out of the deal and to slap the sanctions back had more to do, as the statements came out in May, with the Iranian missile program and the Iranian actions in Syria and also allegedly in Yemen. It wasn't specifically about whether Iran was in compliance with the JCPOA. But this kind of unilateral withdrawal makes US a rather mercurial treaty partner. Would you agree with that?
I do. Certainly it does, yes.
So now that there is also the North Korean issue, do you think North Korea won't be looking at what's happened with Iran? And I want to ask you specifically what the Iranians are likely to do now, because their foreign minister, Javad Zarif, has said very clearly that Iran will not renegotiate this deal.
Well, I think Zarif is absolutely right. He will not negotiate the deal, and he has pressure domestically as well from those who oppose the deal in the first place within Iran, the sort of so-called hardliners in Iran. So I think the room for the Iranians to renegotiate such a deal is not there. Secondly, I think the Iranians feel strongly that it is only the United States and Israel that are opposing such an agreement. Whereas the other major players, the Russians, the Chinese, and even the European Union are fully backing this. So they are looking for assurances by the supporters of the deal to find alternative means to engage with Iran and to help Iran in the areas that they want, which is basically economic advantages and economic opportunities with these countries. So the Iranian objective would be to undercut the American sanctions, and because these are American sanctions, these are not UN sanctions.
Yeah.
So they are limited in that context, although they may have wide-ranging impact. And
they have wide-ranging impact. In fact, I have this analysis in front of me, and I'm just going to quote from here. The European powers have been working on setting up a so-called special purpose vehicle that would act as a kind of clearinghouse, matching Iranian exports with EU exports in what amounts to a barter arrangement to circumvent US sanctions. But then it says, but the countries they've approached to host it have declined. Now, that creates problems.
But there's obviously American pressure on all these countries, and the ability of the European Union countries to actually put together such an arrangement is limited given their own bilateral and joint exchange, trade relations and other relations with the U.S. Even so, I think that certain European countries, if not the entire European Union, would be willing to find ways to deal with Iran, and certainly Russia and China are not covered by this, so they will find their own way. They are already working on ways of engaging with Iran. So that's what I mean, that these are not UN sanctions, even though they may have a wide-ranging impact, but still they are not international sanctions of the kind that existed before the deal.
Okay. Now, while this is going on, Ambassador Kenneth Ward, the US ambassador, told a meeting of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons that Iran has failed to report a production facility. So now, from the nuclear this to also the chem weapons.
Well, you know, and my take is that you mentioned the motivations for President Trump. I think one of the major motivations was to undo anything that was done by his predecessor, President Obama. One. Two, the Trump administration wants to demonstrate that it's very much more closer to Israel than its predecessors. So such a stance has been taken at Israel's behest. And they will find other ways. You mentioned the Iranian so-called missile program, and now this claims about the Iranian chemical weapons program. So these kind of accusations will come up. But the fact remains that, as you also mentioned, the IAEA has given a clean chit to the Iranians.
Yeah.
And I expect that the OPCW, the Chemical Weapons Organization, but probably also give such a report. I have certainly not seen any report by the OPCW that says that Iran has been in violation of its commitments.
Okay, so do you think that this seems like a replay of what happened in the run-up to the US invasion of Iraq?
Well, I should hope not, because I mean.
No, I mean in terms of the allegations and you know the accusations.
Yes, certainly. I mean, we know now in hindsight, and some of us, even at the time before the invasion of Iraq, knew that this was false, that the Americans were making false accusations, and now that's been confirmed, even by the Americans themselves. So, yes, they can always make such a false accusation or against Iran to justify some kind of action. But the problem is that, well, first and foremost, the Americans have before them their own disastrous invasion of Iraq. And are they willing to repeat the same kind of mistake with Iran, which is probably going to be even worse than it was, than Iraq was for them? So I think that the Americans are not going to go that far as they did with Iraq, but they'll certainly try and use this as a means of isolating Iran.
Isolating Iran. Yes, absolutely. That seems to be the strategy, and the European Union countries, the UK, Germany and France, are trying somehow to circumvent these US sanctions. Thank you so much. Ambassador Zamir Akram was talking to us. In our discussion of the IAEA report, which gave a clean chit to Iran as far as compliance with the JCPOA is concerned, and the fact that the US unilaterally got out of it, not on the basis of Iran's non-compliance, but on the basis of what the Americans said is the Iranian behavior and outreach in Syria and also in Yemen. To speak about this, we now have Marzia Javadi, who teaches at the Tehran University and is also a researcher. Thank you for being on the program, Ms. Javadi. Give me a sense of how Iran is looking at this post-IAEA report and with reference to the US sanctions.
Okay. The recent IAEA report, just like the previous reports that was released by IAEA, once again indicates Iran's full compliance with the commitments in the JCPOA. And it shows that Iran has chosen the path of, peaceful nuclear program as it was before previously, and it wants to continue that path. But it's the United States which does not abide by its side of the bargain and still wants to impose unlawful sanctions on Iran, despite the fact that, it's an international agency which has approved Iran's compliance with the terms of the commitment. I think it's just a behavior. It shows the untrustful behavior of the United States that does not even agree to, the approval of an international agency, and it's just a unilateral movement, which obviously, as we can see, even the allies of the United States are turning against the U.S.
Okay, so the Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif has very categorically said that Iran is not going to renegotiate this deal. So that is obviously the Iranian position. But on the other hand, the UK, France and Germany are trying to, in order to circumvent these US sanctions, they're trying to create a special purpose vehicle which could be some sort of barter arrangement. But they haven't really been able to find any countries that could host this arrangement. So, so when the sanctions kick into play, as they have already kicked into play, it will obviously have a negative impact on the Iranian economy.
Yes, sure. Well, Iran has given, I think, enough time to EU countries, to try to find a different path, to, as you said, a special purpose vehicle. And still Iran is giving them time to see what they can do. Obviously, as Foreign Minister Zarif said, this deal cannot be renegotiated because there is no guarantee that, when the United States walks away from the nuclear deal, is there any guarantee that they would not walk away from other deals?
Yes.
So that would not be a possible path to go on. So I think the Europeans have to make, their commitments, as soon as possible. But we don't know whether they can also, because they have their own challenges within themselves, and they're afraid, I think, of confronting the United States.
Yeah, because their companies will obviously, if they deal with Iran, then the sanctions also apply to them. But thank you so much.
Yeah.
Ms. Marzia Javadi was speaking with us on Iran's compliance and US sanctions. This is all for today from Indus Special, and we'll see you next week with our stories.